Hi, music history class, and hello, Professor Hamry. I deeply miss you all, and I hate doing music school online. I hope that I can see you again soon. So I'm here today to give a presentation on Richard Wagner. I'll be attempting to do it on my computer, and hopefully you're able to read and see everything. I just want to start with a quote that he said right here: "Imagination creates reality." True. So here are some key points about his life. He was best known for creating several complex operas, including the opera that we listened to called Tristan and Isolde, as well as the Ring Cycle. And he was also known for his anti-Semitic writings, which made him very controversial. He was born in Germany on May 22nd, 1813. He went on to become one of the world's most influential and controversial composers. He is famous for both of his epic operas, including the four-part 18-hour Ring Cycle, as well as his anti-Semitic writings, and oddly enough, those writings made him a favorite of Adolf Hitler. There is actually evidence that Wagner's music, was played at the Dachau concentration camp to re-educate the prisoners. Wagner had a tumultuous love life, and it involved several scandalous love affairs, which we'll go more into later. And then he died of a heart attack in Venice on February 13th, 1883. There he is. This is him when he was young, maybe my age or something, I'm not sure. So I'm going to talk about his early life now. So Wilhelm Richard Wagner was born on May 22nd, 1813 in Leipzig, Germany. And then obviously he became to go on to become one of the world's most influential and controversial composers. His parentage we are not sure of. So he's either the son of police actuary named Friedrich Wagner, and he died soon after Richard was born, or he was the son of the man which he called his stepfather, and he was a painter, actor, and poet named Ludwig Geyer. His mother married Geyer in August 1814. And then as a young boy, he didn't actually immediately show talent with music and an interest in it. He attended school in Dresden, Germany, and he did not show aptitude in music, as I said. And actually, one of his teachers, when he was growing up, said this about his piano playing. Quote, she said, quote, "He would torture the piano in a most abominable fashion." Wow. Okay. And then when he was 11 years old, he just took off musically after that. He wrote his first drama at 11. And then age 16, he began writing musical compositions. And young Wagner was very confident that some people considered him conceited. No surprise there, I'm sure. And so now I'm going to talk about his early musical career after his young years. So he attended Leipzig University in 1831, and his first symphony was then performed in 1833. He was inspired by Ludwig van Beethoven, actually, and in particular his Ninth Symphony. Wagner referred to Beethoven's Ninth as that mystic source of my highest ecstasies. Then the following year, in 1834, Wagner joined the Würzburg Theater as a course master, and he wrote the text and the music of his first opera called Die Feen, or The Fairies. However, it was not staged. And here is a picture of Leipzig University. I don't know how good it looks on my phone, but it certainly looks pretty from right here. And then this is the Würzburg Theater in Germany. Okay. And then going on, in 1836, Wagner met and married the singer and actress named Mina Planner. The couple moved soon to Königsberg, where Wagner took the position of musical director at the Magdeburg Theater. There, also in 1836, Das Liebesverbot, which is an early comic opera in 2 acts, was produced. Wagner wrote at the same time he wrote the lyrics and the music. And he called this concept of writing both the music and the lyrics at the same time, he called it Gesamtkunstwerk, or a total work of art. It was a method which he frequently used of weaving German myths with larger themes about love and redemption into his music. Here's a picture of Wagner and Mina. And then this is a picture of the Magdeburg Theater. And so then he moved to Riga, Russia, which is actually now in Latvia, in 1837. Wagner became the first musical director of the theater and began to work on his next opera called Rienzi. Before finishing this opera Rienzi, Wagner and Mina left Riga because they were fleeing creditors in 1839. Then they hopped on a ship to London, and then they made their way to Paris. And there, Wagner took whatever work that he could find in Paris, just, writing things for small theater companies and whatnot. And then while he was writing his opera Rienzi, he also became interested in part of the quasi-revolutionary Young Germany movement. And he had leftist political views, which were reflected in this opera. And just to backtrack, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Young Germany movement is. So it was a group of German writers, which there's a page. Hang on, that page is mixed up. This one here. Anyway, Young Germany was a group of German writers which existed from about 1830 to 1850. It is essentially a youth ideology, and it had swept France, Ireland, United States of America, and Italy in those similar countries. The writers of the Young Germany movement were against what they perceived as of absolutism in politics and obscurantism in religion. They maintained the principles of democracy, socialism, and rationalism. Among the many things that were advocated were separation of church and state, emancipation of the Jews, and the raising of the political and social position of women. And then, because of these views that he had, he was unable to produce Rienzi in Paris. So then, he sent the score to the Court Theater in Dresden, Germany, where it was accepted. And then, in 1842, Wagner's opera Rienzi, which is a political opera set in Imperial Rome, was premiered in Dresden, and it did very well there. This is an album cover of a recording of the music from that opera. And then I'm going to talk about more of his works after Rienzi. So the following year, he worked on and produced his opera, The Flying Dutchman, and it also did very well. And after this, he was considered a great talent at the time. And then Wagner was given the Prussian Order of the Red Eagle, and he was appointed director of the Dresden Opera. In 1845, Wagner completed Tannhäuser, his opera, and then he began working on his opera Lohengrin. And then in 1848, while preparing for a production of Lohengrin in Dresden, the revolutionary outbreak of war in Saxony occurred, and then Wagner, who was very well spoken in his political ideals, he fled to Zurich. And then he was unable to return to Germany because of his leftist political views and writings. So he wrote, while he was unable to return to Germany, he wrote the notoriously anti-Semitic work called Jewishness in Music. And this, he was essentially just criticizing against Jews, composers, conductors, authors, and critics, all of the Jewish faith. And then also during this time, he wrote another work called Opera and Drama, and then that turned into what was later going to be developed, known as the Ring Cycle. The Ring Cycle consisted of 4 separate operas tied together by leitmotifs, or recurring musical themes which link plot elements. The Ring Cycle was way ahead of its time in that it combined literature, visual elements, and music in a way that would anticipate the future of film. So just like now, after his usage of leitmotifs, we see usage of leitmotifs everywhere in movies, with composers such as like John Williams and Hans Zimmer. So that was quite monumental, his usage of that, and it just soared in popularity after that. And then also the Ring Cycle took him 26 years to write. This is a scene from one production of it. So then, now we're moving into more fun things with his love life now. So, in 1862, wrong spot. After meeting and falling in love with a woman named Mathilde Wesendonck, and she was the wife of a merchant named Otto Wesendonck, Wagner was then inspired to write Tristan and Isolde. His interest in Wesendonck, Matilda, as well as with other events in his life, this caused him to separate from his wife Mina. This is a picture of them, not at the same time, but just kind of put together. Oh, and then there's more. Isn't that fun? So, in 1862, he was finally able to return to Germany. King Ludwig II, he was a great fan of Wagner's work. He invited Wagner to settle in Bavaria, near Munich, and he supported him very much so financially. Most scholars actually agree that King Ludwig was a heterosexual. No way, a homosexual. They almost certain that he was gay. For a time, King Ludwig was engaged to his cousin named Sophie Charlotte. And both of them shared a love of music of Wagner, but I think that Ludwig's was just so intense, his love, that it kind of was like a red flag with Sophie. And then eventually King Ludwig called off the proposal just because of, if he was gay, there was just a lot of stress on him, and he wouldn't have wanted to go through with that anyway. And then he was also Catholic, so his homosexual desires were just a great source of just negativity and tumultuous feelings that he had. And he was afraid of lack of acceptance. And then after he actually met Wagner, he became a patron of Wagner, and he bestowed considerable funds upon the older man Wagner. And he spent a considerable amount of time with Wagner in Munich. And then at one point, they were separated, Ludwig and Wagner, due to the political machinations against Wagner. And Ludwig wrote to Wagner's consort, Cosima, which we'll talk about more later. Cosima, I don't know if I'm saying that right. He said, "I tell you, I cannot bear to live apart from him much longer. I suffer terribly. This is no passing youthful infatuation." So that's interesting, some theories about why Ludwig just really liked Wagner. Anyway, this is a picture of both of them. That is Wagner, and that's Ludwig. So now we're going to talk more about his love life. There's more. So Wagner didn't stay long in Bavaria with King Ludwig II because once it was discovered that he was having an affair with Cosima, who is the wife of the conductor Hans von Bülow, and she is also Franz Liszt's illegitimate daughter, as we talked about in class with Liszt. And Bülow, the conductor and the husband of Cosima, he obviously condoned the affair. No surprise there. But he actually ended up directing Tristan and Isolde in 1865. Interesting. Wagner and Cosima had 2 children together before they finally married in 1870. There they are. They're so cute together, actually, I think. Okay, and then in his final years, the first 2 parts of the Ring Cycle were presented in Munich in 1869 and 1870, and then the entirety of the Ring Cycle was finally performed, all 18 hours of it, in 1876. And then he completed his last opera, Parsifal, in January 1882, and it was performed at the Bayreuth Festival that same year. Wagner died of a heart attack on February 13th, 1833, and he was 69, while vacationing in Venice, Italy, for a winter. That's when he had the heart attack. His body was then shipped by gondola and train back to Bayreuth, where he was buried. And then his legacy was controversial, but he was such an important composer. In the 20th century, Adolf Hitler became a large fan of Wagner's music, only making his legacy even more controversial. Today, Wagner and his music are associated in the minds of many with Nazism, and his operas are often thought to extol the virtues of German nationalism. Again, I said earlier in my presentation that there is evidence that the music of Wagner was used at the Dachau concentration camp between 1933 and 34 to re-educate political prisoners by exposure to national music. And then the Nazi fascination with Wagner was largely inspired by Hitler, sometimes to the dismay of other high-ranking Nazi officials. He would buy all these tickets out at a theater to a production of Wagner's, and then he would make his officials go, but then he would get to the theater and no one would be there. So finally he kind of learned his lesson, and he bought the tickets and released them to the general public, actually. But yeah, that was just, and then also Wagner's music was generally often performed during the Third Reich. So that's just a little bit about how Wagner and Nazism went together, and how he had to do with Adolf Hitler. And then I'm going to close with two quotes that I found from the New York Times that I think are brilliant statements about Wagner. So the first one I will read is from New York Times writer Anthony Tomasini. He wrote this of Wagner in 2005, quote, "How did such sublime music come from such a warped man? Maybe art really does have the power to ferret out the best in us." Close quote. I think right on the nose with that quote. And the final quote I'd like to end my presentation with is also from the New York Times. They wrote this in his obituary of Wagner after his death. Quote, "In the face of mortifying failures and discouragements, he apparently never lost confidence in himself." Close quote. Yeah, I think that those two quotes just excellently kind of summarize who he was as a person and a musician. And even though he did some horrible things in his life, it's clear that, yeah, he had confidence. And I think, maybe is what I can take to learn from Wagner is maybe not get into all these affairs, but, definitely have confidence in yourself. All right, that's all. Thank you.